Welcome to the Rules of Engagement, everybody. As always, I'll be your host, Nick axslav ranish, as we analyze Starcraft 2 and the strategies and tactics used in the game and how you can use tactics that you see the pros use to enhance and improve your play back when you play on the ladder or play versus your friends at home. Anyways, today we're going to go over Parting versus Sen. That was a series played at MLG Dallas. We're going to be looking at games 1 and 4 to this series. So we're going to first take a look at game number 1, some of the first parts about that. Then we're going to take a look at game number 1 again in the more advanced stages. There's a lot of things that go on in this game, so we're going to spend 2 sections going over it. Then we're going to talk about game number 4, which I thought was actually a really interesting game as well. Then, of course, the viewer Q&A will be the last part of the show. So submit any questions you have to me at axslav on Twitter. I'll answer all those during the viewer Q&A. And also don't forget, if you want your replays to be potentially analyzed on this show, go to majorleaguegaming.com/replays, and there's a little form you can fill out there, and it just takes about like 30 seconds, just a brief description of the game, your race, your opponent's race. Send that over to majorleaguegaming.com/replays, and we'll see those in a future date on air. Let's jump into game number 1, part 1, Parting versus Sen. A few things I want to talk about in this section are going to be macroing aggressively in PvZ and what that means and how you can do it in a different way in Heart of the Swarm. How to follow up a fast third in PvZ. And then also talk a little bit about Zerg mid-game compositions. So we're going to jump right into the replay starting at the 6-minute mark. And first let me explain what I mean when I say macroing aggressively. So anything that's aggressive is an action that basically mean that your opponent has to make a reaction to. It's something that if they don't react to, they're going to either fall behind, take damage, or something. That's what aggression means in basically a strategical term, or at least how we're going to use it in StarCraft 2. So macroing aggressively means that what you're going to do is you're going to basically do your macro in such a way that if your opponent doesn't respond, they're going to fall behind. And what I mean by that is you're going to either tech up or expand very, very, very quickly. And your opponent will either have to change their build to be a little bit non-standard and tech up and expand and be very greedy as well, or they're going to have to try to punish you and basically prevent you from doing all the macro that you want to do, or else they're going to fall behind. So if you're Protoss and you want to play this really aggressive macro style, you want to take a very, very fast third base. We can see here before the 7-minute mark that Nexus goes down. And if you want to do that, if you're not going to invest in any harass force anyway, like you're not going to go early Stargate, you might as well throw that Nexus down as soon as possible. The sooner you put that Nexus down, the sooner it will pay itself off. And against like a 11, 12-minute Roach max, you're actually better off if you expand super early. Because then by the time 11 or 12 minutes rolls around, that expansion has already paid itself off, and you have a lot of units at your disposal. And again, of course, you want to do what Parting does, where you put a little bit of pressure early on to keep the Zerg from canceling this expansion, make sure all their Zerglings are stuck back on defense early on, and that'll give you time to set up this nice little wall we're going to see them do, right? So you build a cannon, and you build some gateways there, and that makes it much, much harder for the Zerg to take down this expansion as you're basically taking the few minutes it takes to turn that extra income that you're going to get from that expansion into extra units. So again, put on a little bit of pressure early with a couple units that are very mobile. You don't mind losing the Zealot too much. The Stalkers should be fast enough they can escape from either Roaches or Zerglings until that speed upgrade finishes. Just try to get some damage done as much as you can. Forcing drones to pull anything is a victory here. The main thing you're trying to do is keep the Zerg distracted. If you can pick off a Queen Head, that's amazing. Although if you pick off a Queen, the Zerg definitely made a mistake there, because that shouldn't be happening. Of course, he's going to recall out of there when he becomes, okay, maybe I might get surrounded. Even if he could have ran away, the Zealot would have died, and then maybe he thought speed was even closer to being finished than it was. You don't want to risk losing those Stalkers, so if you think it's getting a little hairy, recall out, because now the Zerg wants to throw the counterattack, your expansion is up, and you're in very, very good shape. So now we're going to back this up a tiny bit and talk about, you've got that third base up as a Protoss. How do you follow that up to gain the most benefit from that aggressive opening, in a way, or aggressive expansion, I guess I should say. So one thing you want to do is you want to basically try to catch up in tech, because you delayed your first tech building to put down this Nexus, right? So as soon as you feel safe, like, okay, I've got the cannon there, I've got some extra gateways to help protect that cannon, I can use some warp-ins in case he hits me with speedlings, he's going to throw down the Twilight Council immediately. Now, alternatively, this could be Robotics or a Stargate, and in fact, he's going to follow up with a Robotics shortly thereafter. But the reason he's going Twilight Council is because if you're ever in doubt about what the Zerg is doing, I mean, when he poked here, remember, all he saw was 2 Queens, a few Zerglings, and a Spine Crawler. He doesn't really have any information. In fact, if you look at his vision, that's all he has. That's all he knows, right? So he's in doubt right now about what the Zerg's doing. And if you're ever in a situation where you're in doubt about what the Zerg's doing, going for Blink Stalkers and upgrades is good against everything, right? It may not be the perfect response. Like, maybe if you absolutely were 100% sure to go in Mutas, 2 Stargate Phoenix would be better. But Blink Stalkers can deal with everything. You're like a very versatile composition. And, of course, attack upgrades are always great as well. So the Twilight Council gives you access to the level 2 attack upgrade, as well as giving you access to Blink, and so you can really respond to a variety of threats with that tech option. Then, while you're doing that as your first tech option, what you want to do is you want to start scouting your opponent to figure out exactly what they're doing so you can be better informed. If you're going muteless, you need to position units in the back, make sure you don't lose probes. If you're doing a mass roach bust, maybe add in a few more cannons. You know, you might want more than 2, you might want 4. You're going to want to wall off this area right here as well. So send that Hallucinating Phoenix, get some scouting information, so you can know exactly what's going on. You see double evolution chambers there. You're like, okay, must be teching if his evos are that late. Now he sees Infestation Pit and Hydra Den, so he knows, okay, he's opening with Hydras, then he's either going to go straight to Hive for Vipers, or he's going to be going Swarm Hosts, or he's going to be maybe going Infestors, so those aren't super common anymore. So Party's going to go for the Colossi, and you don't have to go Colossi. I mean, Storm would be a great option here as well, but given how popular Swarm Hosts have been getting in Zerg versus Protoss, Colossi aren't a bad option because they're very, very good against those Swarm Hosts. And then he says, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and take a 4th as well, knowing that my opponent's teching and his upgrades aren't super fast, so I've got a good army here. Now, let's say that these buildings are really, you know, Sen just built them for the heck of it. He didn't really even want to use those, and he was massing roaches. And so right now, 11 minutes, he'd probably be basically maxed at his level of skill. He could be very, very close to max, if not max, on roaches at this point, given the way the game's gone. What would happen is partner would just lose this 4th base he's trying to set up. But he'd still be perfectly fine. He'd just cancel it, and he could defend his 3rd base. And if your opponent maxed out on roaches, you should be very, very content to just hold on to 3 bases, because as you add in those robo units and as you get Blink and upgrades, you're going to be very, very cost efficient against them. So going forward now, this is the way Partners followed it up, a very versatile follow-up, very common, very, very sensible, right? Now we're going to look at the Zerg from the Zerg position, right? We're going to take a look at this from Sen's point of view. And what has Sen been doing? Of course, he knew his opponent took a 3rd base very fast, even back at as soon as that Nexus was put down there, his Overlord spotted it. In fact, he had a Zergling right here that actually saw it as well. So he knows exactly what's going on. And now he's going, he's thinking, what composition do I want going into the, basically the mid part of the game? You know, obviously if he takes fast 3rd, he's going to be going to the mid game. So what composition should I go for? And the one thing that's really cool about Heart of the Swarm is that as soon as you have basically the option to get Vipers, right? So you have Hive Tech available. One thing you can say is, okay, Roaches and Hydralisks are no longer dead weight in the late game. In Wings of Liberty, if you're a Zerg player and you know you're going to be stuck fighting a tuner versus tuner food battle at some point, you want to minimize the number of Roaches and Hydralisks you have because they're going to be so useless against this composition from the Protoss as it gets bigger. Right now you can fight this okay, but as this army gets bigger, it's going to be very, very, very hard to deal with this type of army from the Protoss. So you don't want to be building all these Hydralisks here. You don't want to be building these 10 Roaches in Wings of Liberty. In Heart of the Swarm, because of Vipers, you don't have to worry about Colossi so much anymore. And so Roaches and Hydralisks are better as you go into the late game. And even if they go High Templar, Blinding Cloud is still very useful against the Stalkers or Immortals or whatever other range units they have in their army. Vipers are always very useful, and they just synchronize. They have a very symbiotic relationship with Hydralisks and Roaches. Very good combination. So you don't have to worry about getting Hydralisks and Roaches in the mid game holding you back as you go into late game. The other thing that you should think about as a Zerg player that a lot of Zergs are still getting used to is that if we jump this back just a little bit, right? Take a look at this from the 11-minute point of view. If you're a Zerg player and you're like, okay, I want to go Swarm Hosts and Hydralisks, right? What do I have to watch out for? Colossi. In Heart of the Swarm, Corruptors basically become almost pointless against Protoss. There's some weird situations where you want them against Phoenixes, but in general, you pretty much almost never want to get Corruptors in Heart of the Swarm. And it's something that's hard to kind of reconcile with your history of playing Zerg, because if you're used to playing Zerg in Wings of Liberty, you're thinking, I make Roaches and Hydralisks, Colossi can be very deadly, I've got to get those Corruptors out there to take those out. But if you think about how effective Corruptors are versus Colossi, they're actually pretty darn bad, because let's say your opponent has 3 or 4 Colossi. You're going to need at least 8 Corruptors to deal with that, if not more. And 8 Corruptors are exactly half the price of a Colossi, or of a Colossus. So 8 Corruptors, you're already spending as much money as the Protoss is on their Colossi in your Corruptors, if not more. Then you have to realize that even if you take them out, those Colossi are still going to do massive damage before they're taken out. So you're spending as much money as they are, and you're not even neutralizing their units, because they're still going to do significant damage before they're taken out. And which means that you're basically stuck with a ground army that's very weak because you spent so much money in Corruptors, and it's going to be even weaker because even though you got the Corruptors, the Colossi have taken out substantial amounts of your units before they were taken out, and you're just going to die to the Stalkers. So that's why you didn't see Roach Hydra Corruptor in Wings of Liberty, and that's why you're still probably not going to see it in Heart of the Swarm, because against Colossi Stalker, just going to beat that competition unless the Zerg has an insane economic advantage, or, you know, they outposition, outmaneuver the Protoss player. Typically, though, it's going to be from an economic advantage. So sometimes it can work depending how the openings go out. But in Heart of the Swarm, you don't need to do that anymore, because you got the Vipers. And if you think about countering 4 Colossi, 8 Corruptors, which will take a little while to kill those Colossi, or 2 Vipers at full energy, have 4 Abducts, yank all 4 of those Colossi in your army, they're down really quickly, and you spent much much less resources in countering those Colossi, and not to mention the fact that, unlike the Corruptors, which just have Corruption, which is kind of worthless, your Vipers still have use. After they abduct the Colossi, they can go recharge energy somewhere and do all Blinding Clouds for the next battle, even if there's no Colossi. The Abducts can work on the Immortals. The Abducts can work on the Archons. You know, Blinding Cloud is great versus everything but Zealots, which isn't really a threat anyway. So Vipers are a much better option. And the thing that Zerg players are starting to realize now is that, let's say you're in this position that Sen is right now. Let's look exactly what he has, okay? So right now, Sen has Infestation Pit done, 11 minutes, and he's got a lair. So he's just starting to Spire because he's like, I need something to deal with Colossi. So this Spire takes 100 seconds to build. Once that's done, you can build Corruptors that'll take 40 seconds each to build. But if you have Infestation Pit already done, the Hive Tech takes 100 seconds to complete. It's cheaper than a Spire. And when that's done, you can build Vipers, which take 40 seconds to build. So from this point, Vipers and Corruptors take exactly the same amount of length to get to. Vipers are even slightly cheaper as far as the Hive cost versus Spire cost. And of course, they're much more effective. So as a Zerg player going forward, if you want to do this Hydra Swarm Host mix, it's kind of counterintuitive, but I'd highly recommend going for the Hive Tech much faster. And then delaying that Spire until maybe you want to do a Muta switch later or a Broodlord switch later if you don't think Tempest are going to be a problem. That can be pushed out later. And it's kind of weird because you think 11-minute Hive, that's so much investment. I'm not going to have a strong ground army. And that was only true in Wings of Liberty because Wings of Liberty went 11-minute Hive, you're massing spines because you're defensive. But the reason you're defensive is not because of the money you spent on the Hive. It's because in Wings of Liberty, you're also getting a Spire, and you're also building like 12, 14 Corruptors that you're going to turn into Broodlords later. So there's the Hive is like the tiniest grain of the investment in your Wings of Liberty Hive Tech play. In Heart of the Swarm, you can do that Hive Tech play without investing very much into it, so you can still get a big Roach Hydra army and still be fine in that mid-game. That's going to wrap it up for this first part of how the opening and mid-games go in this game number 1. Take a short break and then talk about how the mid-game compositions evolve, tactics to basically deal with Swarm Host, deal with Protoss high-tech units, and the really fun late game that we see in Party vs. Sen Game 1 on Cloud Kingdom.